Yeah, well, about the encouragement of science by Christians, you know, tell that to Giordano Bruno, Galileo, and various other people. I think that's a very, very biased view of the history of science. If anybody preserved science through to the time when people actually started rediscovering the Greeks and rebelling against the church, it was the Islamic culture that actually preserved something of that scientific culture and made some progress in scientific culture. But the remark I think is that I've been wanting to make, and I made it once, but I wanted to emphasize that again. All your answers, so many of your answers presuppose this idea that we can take seriously eternal life, but we can't. We know as well as we know anything in this world, which is not perfect, which is not logical, that after we die, we are incapable of consciousness. We do not have a separate soul. All our states of consciousness are in here.
Okay. So unfortunately, due to time constraints, we're only going to have time for a couple more questions. So we're going to take one more. We're going to take this one for Dr. De Sousa, and then one more for Dr. Craig, and one more for Dr. De Sousa. So everyone else who's in line, very sorry we're not going to have time to take the questions, at least not at this moment. So, Tom.
Dr. De Sousa, it seems that some of the arguments, not all of them, are attacking the Christian God, and obviously Dr. Craig is defending the Christian God also. I believe that in order for us to know about the nature of the Christian God, it's important for us to look at Scripture and what the Bible says about the nature of God. And it's clear that He allows evil for a good ultimate purpose, that every good and perfect gift comes from Him as He's benevolent, but He also, in the scope of His power and omniscience, He is in charge of what is antithetical to His nature, also the evil. My question is this: how does your attack, because you spoke about God being an evil bully, how does that defend your position that God does not exist when you are making a claim of the nature of God?
I simply mean that if there is a God, He's not the one you're describing. He is instead a vicious bully. Now, since that's not the God that you believe in, then the God you believe in does not exist. Now, I also happen to think that an evil bully God does not exist either, because all of these horrible things that happened are simply results of the nature of things. They don't require an intentional agent. They don't require to be intended to be done on purpose. And most things in life, let me return to this point which I made earlier, most things in life actually do not mean anything. They don't result from any intention. They don't actually result from any kind of reason.
Dr. De Sousa seems to have the view that on Christianity, that God causes all of the evil and suffering in the world, and that's simply not the case. The idea is that these things can happen for purely natural reasons. As he said, the fire that warms you can burn you. The water that you sustains you can drown you. But the point is that on the theistic view, God has morally sufficient reasons for permitting the evil and suffering in the world. And if Dr. De Sousa is to carry his argument for atheism, he needs to show that God cannot have morally sufficient reasons for allowing the bad things that happen in the world to happen. And that is to shoulder a burden of proof which is so enormous that it goes far beyond the sort of explanations that he accuses me of having. He has a modesty, he says, when it comes to these explanations, but that modesty vanishes when it comes to his own skepticism about whether God has morally sufficient reasons for the evil in the world. I don't see how he can prove that that's impossible or even improbable.
Okay, final question for Dr. Craig.
Okay. Yeah, I was kind of lost. I wanted to be on the other side, but I was kind of in the lineup, so I'm going to ask the question to both of you, and yeah, I'm just going to make a comment too that I think was a very fruitful debate, and I think that both of you really helped to enlighten everybody here. But like one of the questions that was really on my mind was to say that, do you both agree that it cannot be scientifically proven that God exists, or it cannot be scientifically proven that God cannot exist? It's just a simple question that we as humans can't answer.
Well, wait a minute. What was that last part?
It's just simple that we as humans can't answer that question.
Oh, that doesn't follow from the fact that it can't be scientifically proven. I was all ready to agree with you that there's no scientific proof for the existence of God. But behind your last comment sticks the assumption that if something can't be scientifically proven, that therefore it cannot be known or it can't be justified. And that's false. That is to presuppose a theory of knowledge which says that science is the only arbiter of truth. And that's simply wrong. Moral values cannot be scientifically proven. You can't prove moral values. You can't find them in a test tube. Aesthetics is not susceptible to the scientific method. Mathematics and logic cannot be scientifically proven. Quite the contrary, science presupposes mathematics and logic. You can't prove the existence of the external world scientifically. You can't prove the reality of the past scientifically. There's all kinds of beliefs that we all hold, that are rational to hold, that are not amenable or susceptible to scientific proof. So don't fall into this trap of scientism that sometimes permeates our culture, thinking that the only arbiter and way to know truth is through science. That will leave you with a skepticism that would be virtually unlivable. So while I'm quite happy to say there's no scientific proof of God's existence, nevertheless, I think that the arguments that I defended tonight are good philosophical arguments for God's existence. They are logically valid. They are based on premises that I believe to be true, and those premises are more plausible than their negations. And therefore, I think these are good arguments for God's existence. That doesn't mean they're compelling. Doesn't mean they will convince you against your will, but I think it does mean if you're willing to look at them with an open mind and an open heart, they are sufficient to justify belief in God.
I almost agree with all of that, except that in that last bit, I think that it is indeed possible to say what is not scientifically proved, but the most reasonable thing to conclude from all the evidence and reasoning one can apply to it, and that is that no God such as has been talked about or defined today, having both the attributes of being at the origin of the world and at the origin of ethics and at the beck and call of human beings to some extent, that no such God exists.
Final question before Brian.
Yes. How do you convince people to share your views of atheism, for example, medievist, Marxist, fascist, nationalistic factions, but not necessarily share your views of humanistic optimism to do good, like goodness in your own definition?
You're asking how can the people who agree with me about some things disagree about others?
Yes, particularly with the views of atheism. For example, like cultural Christians who normally are Christians, but they really do not practice Christianity, they're not devout, and they have the more selfish kind of appetite to be true.
I'm sorry, I still didn't really get the question. Are you asking the question about how can atheists be bad people, given my views?
How do you convince someone who's from your worldview, from their own worldview, who also believes that there is no God, or who really doesn't think to highlight the question whether God doesn't exist, and to do basically goodness?
Well, how can I argue about morality without bringing in God? Is that what you're asking? How could I convince someone that my moral views are the right ones
How can one atheist convince one atheist to do good, basically, if your own definition of good is different from the other atheist's definition of good? Because there's no reference for whatsoever.